She stole it. I watched her slip it right into her pocket. The neighbor's voice rang across the manicured lawn, sharp enough to silence the string quartet mid-note. Guests turned, glasses paused halfway to their lips, and a 10-year-old girl stood frozen beneath a canopy of white lights, trembling as accusation settled on her shoulders. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Because what happened next wasn't just about a missing watch. It was about the moment a powerful voice tried to decide who mattered in a neighborhood and who didn't. The councilman didn't lower his tone. Instead, he repeated the charge louder, letting the word stole drift deliberately through clusters of donors and perfectly dressed families. Someone whispered that children learned behavior from their parents. Another guest stepped back as if disgrace could spread by proximity. Yet the man they expected to argue didn't. He simply walked forward, steady, measured, his expression unreadable. And before this night was over, the same lawn would witness a truth no reputation could outrun, because sometimes the quietest return home carries the loudest reckoning. Remaining subpart. Elijah Cale didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. Years of training had carved that restraint into bone long before this neighborhood ever learned his name. His boots crossed the trimmed grass without sound, though his pulse hammered with a rhythm he recognized from darker places. War had taught him something simple. Panic belonged to amateurs. He stopped beside his daughter and rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. The small tremor running through her arm traveled straight into his chest, where it tightened like a wire pulled too far. "Easy," he murmured, barely audible. Mira looked up, confusion flooding her wide eyes. "Dad, I didn't take anything." "I know." He didn't ask what happened. Didn't need to. Not yet. Across from them stood Brent Halden, Brookstone Ridge's unofficial monarch. Tailored navy suit, campaign smile polished to a gleam. The kind of man who shook hands like cameras were always watching, even when they weren't. Tonight, plenty were. "This is unfortunate," Brent said, projecting sympathy that never reached his eyes. "But integrity matters here, especially at a community event." Community. The word scraped. Elijah had moved his children here precisely because it promised safety. Quiet streets, good schools, neighbors who waved instead of stared. After 15 years rotating through classified deployments, he wanted ordinary problems. Homework battles, soccer practices, burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings. Not this, not his child shrinking beneath suspicion. A faint breeze carried the scent of catered salmon and garden roses. Somewhere behind the crowd, a fountain trickled with rehearsed elegance. Every detail of the evening screamed curated perfection. And yet Elijah noticed what others didn't. The temporary lighting rig hummed at an uneven frequency, cheap wiring beneath expensive fabric, a security camera angled too high, leaving blind space near the refreshment table. The watch in Brent's hand reflected stage light from a direction that didn't match where Mira had been standing minutes earlier. Observation was muscle memory. Once, those instincts had kept entire teams alive. Now they were cataloging a fundraiser. "Maybe she didn't understand what she was doing," Brent continued, lowering his voice just enough to sound merciful. "Kids wander. Curiosity happens." A few guests nodded, relieved to agree with authority. Mira's fingers curled into Elijah's jacket. He crouched slightly so their eyes aligned. "Did you touch it?" "No, I was looking at the drone display." He believed her instantly, not because she was his daughter, but because fear and dishonesty never looked the same. Fear trembled outward, lies folded inward, and Mira was all tremble. Elijah straightened, meeting Brent's gaze for the first time. The councilman expected anger, maybe embarrassment. What he got instead was stillness. "Are you certain you saw her?" Elijah asked quietly. Brent hesitated, only a fraction, but power disliked hesitation. "I wouldn't say it otherwise." Of course he wouldn't. Men like Brent spoke in declarations, not doubts. The crowd waited. Elijah exhaled slowly, letting the moment stretch. In another life, silence had been a tool, a way to make opponents reveal more than they intended. He extended his hand. "May I?" Brent passed over the smartwatch with theatrical reluctance. Elijah turned at once, noting a faint smudge near the clasp, larger than a child's thumbprint. Interesting. But this wasn't the battlefield for conclusions. Not yet. He returned the watch without comment and placed his arm around Mira. "We're leaving." No protest, no defense speech, just departure. Whispers followed immediately. "Did you see his uniform earlier? Maintenance or something? I heard he works at the middle school." "Well, that explains a lot." Each murmur landed, but he didn't react. Soldiers learned quickly that dignity wasn't granted by crowds. It was chosen. They walked past tables glowing with candlelight toward the darker edge of the lawn. Mira sniffed, trying, bravely, not to cry. "You okay?" he asked. Her chin wobbled. "Did everyone think I did it?" "People think a lot of things when they don't have the full picture." The words tasted heavier than he intended. At the curb, he paused, glancing back once. Brent was already laughing with donors again, the disruption neatly folded away as if it had never existed. Efficient, strategic, familiar. Elijah opened the passenger door of their aging sedan, the metal creaking in protest, a stark contrast to the silent electric vehicles lining the street. As Mira climbed in, something near the catering tent flickered in his memory. A boy running, a metallic glint, a quick pocketing motion. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Observation without action was patience. Another lesson written by war. He slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the equipment cases stacked near Brent's garage. Earlier that afternoon, he'd helped secure the event wiring when a volunteer failed to show. Old habit made him test the backup microcam he sometimes carried, a compact unit meant for structural inspections at the school. He'd left it clipped beneath the awning, still recording. For the first time that night, anger stirred, not wild, but cold and deliberate. Whoever controlled the story controlled the damage. Elijah turned the key. The engine coughed awake. Beside him, Mira whispered, "Are we in trouble?" He pulled away from the curb, voice steady as steel wrapped in cloth. "No," he said, "but someone is about to be." And back on the glowing lawn, Brent Halden lifted a champagne glass. Completely unaware the quiet man he'd dismissed was already replaying the night, frame by frame. The following morning arrived sharp and silent. Elijah stepped into the garage before sunrise, the familiar scent of motor oil and dust settling around him like armor. Sunlight hadn't yet crested the rooftops of Brookstone Ridge, but he was already kneeling beside the toolbox, fingers brushing the same duffel bag he'd never fully unpacked since returning home. He didn't open it. Instead, he pulled a compact tablet from a locked compartment in his tool drawer and connected it to the cam unit he'd mounted beneath Brent's canopy. The timestamp aligned perfectly, 17 minutes before the watch went missing. He hit play. There it was, clear as daylight. Brent's nephew, Maxwell, if memory served, pacing near the display table with a soda in hand, glancing around, leaning close, and in a single motion, swiping the smartwatch and tucking it into his jacket pocket. Elijah froze the frame. The boy's eyes were wide, not malicious, just stupid and impulsive. A mistake. But Brent had seen it. The next segment was even more damning. Brent walking up, whispering something into Maxwell's ear, then scanning the crowd before locking eyes on Mira. His expression shifted in that second. Measured, opportunistic. The entire pivot had been calculated. By the way, if you've ever seen someone lie so cleanly they made others doubt the truth, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this story ends. Elijah backed away from the monitor. He didn't feel anger the way he once had, not like fire, not anymore. Now it was cold, strategic, like frost that hardens everything it touches. Brent didn't just accuse Mira, he used her. And in a neighborhood like this, where perception mattered more than facts, the fallout would stick unless someone rewrote the narrative, permanently. Inside the house, Mira stirred. The sound of her dragging feet along the hallway floor reached him before she peeked into the garage, wrapped in her blanket like armor. "Can I stay home today?" she asked softly. He considered it. "We're not hiding." Her face fell, but she nodded. She was too much like her mother that way, brave without needing to be. He stood and pulled her close. "But you can take the morning. I'll drop you after lunch." The corners of her mouth lifted, barely. By 9 a.m., he was in the school maintenance office, quietly changing out air filters. No one greeted him. Usually there were nods, a few hellos from the teachers who appreciated his work. Today, they avoided eye contact. Elijah noticed, but he didn't stop. Instead, he spent the next 3 hours listening. It was always better to let people speak before deciding how to respond. One group of parents had emailed the PTA, expressing concern about the fundraiser incident. The principal hadn't responded yet, but the tone was clear. They were trying to distance the school from Elijah without directly firing him. It was already happening. The shift. That afternoon, he picked Mira up quietly. She hadn't eaten lunch. Her shoulders slumped under a weight no child should carry. In the kitchen, while heating leftovers, she asked, "Are they going to make us move again?" "No," he said. "Even if people believe it?" "They won't need to believe anything," he replied, placing the plate in front of her. "They'll see." He didn't elaborate. She didn't press. That evening, after Mira went to bed, Elijah went for a walk. Not through the park, not through the back streets, right down the center of Brookstone Ridge. The same neighbors who had smiled the week before now pulled their children indoors. Porch lights flicked on, curtains shifted. Let them look, he thought. He wasn't here to reclaim reputation. He was here to correct the record. Across the street, Helen Vortman stood watering her potted lavender, eyes sharp beneath silver curls. "Heard about what happened," she said softly as he passed. He paused. "Of course you did. I also heard Brent's hosting his next campaign event at the Civic Hall, Safety Initiative launch." Elijah met her gaze. "Fitting." Helen hesitated. "You always were precise with timing." That stopped him. It was the first time anyone in the neighborhood acknowledged what they suspected. He wasn't just a janitor, and she wasn't just a retired school teacher. "Good night, Helen." "Good luck, Elijah." At home, he opened his duffel at last. Not to pull out weapons or gear. Those were long gone. but to retrieve a small, smooth case tucked beneath worn clothes. Inside, the ribbon-bound commendation from his final deployment. The commendation that came with a whisper from his CO. Your service never officially happened. And yet, here it was. He placed it beside the tablet. One would expose a lie. The other reminded him why truth had to matter. Outside, the wind shifted, and somewhere down the street, Brent's laughter echoed across another backyard party. Elijah turned off the lights. Time to let silence do its work. By the next morning, Brent Halden's voice was everywhere. Elijah didn't need to check the flyers posted at the mailbox kiosk. 3 neighbors had already mentioned it in hushed tones, acting like the campaign event was just a public good and not the soft launch of Brent's next political move. Brookstone's safety starts at home was the headline. The Civic Hall was booked, the press invited, and Brent's face, square-jawed and statesmanlike, smiled from every glossy handout. But what caught Elijah's attention was the list of community volunteers scheduled to assist with event prep. His name was on it. He hadn't signed up, which meant Brent, or someone, on his team, had penciled him in, perhaps to show inclusivity, perhaps to twist the knife. More likely, they assumed Elijah would feel too ashamed to attend, and his absence could be framed as guilt. They'd miscalculated. At school, the staff still avoided him. The front desk assistant, usually warm, passed him a clipboard without making eye contact. Even the janitorial supply rep who came for the monthly restock kept conversation clipped. Elijah walked the halls like a ghost in his own uniform. Until the second recess bell rang, and he found Mira crouched in the corner of the library's stone planter wall, pretending to read. She wasn't crying. She'd stopped that part already, but her eyes didn't move across the page. She was staring through the words. He sat beside her silently. After a moment, she whispered, "They told me to empty my backpack before I came into class." He clenched his jaw, the inside of his cheek burning. "Did you?" She nodded. "They didn't find anything." "They wouldn't have." Silence stretched between them. A pencil snapped behind the librarian's desk, and someone laughed from the hallway. Finally, he asked, "Do you remember the green camera I showed you? The one from school maintenance? The one that records bugs crawling on pipes?" "Sort of." A small smile tugged at the edge of his mouth. "It caught something important that night." Her head turned slowly. "The watch?" He nodded. "Not just the watch. The truth." A beat passed. "Are you going to show them?" "Not yet." Her brow furrowed. "Why not?" "Because if I show them too early, they'll say it doesn't matter, or it was out of context, or that it was just kids being kids, and they'll twist the story again." He waited until she looked up at him. "They've already decided who we are. If we want to change that, we don't just reveal the truth. We show them what the lie cost." Mira leaned into his side, and he wrapped an arm around her. "I'm tired," she said quietly. "I know. I'm going to make sure you can walk into school without anyone checking your pockets ever again." Later that afternoon, Elijah returned to Brookstone Ridge with one mission: reclaim the narrative. He knocked on Helen Vortman's door. The retired teacher answered within seconds, lips pursed like she'd been waiting. "You saw the flyers?" "I did." "And?" "I want in." Her eyebrows lifted. "On the prep team?" "I need access to the Civic Hall before the event. I want to wire the presentation console and lighting rig myself." She studied him, sharp eyes scanning for intent. "Why?" "Because Brent's going to stand in front of the community and talk about protection and safety and doing what's right. And when he does, I want every person in that room to know what he really protected that night." Helen tilted her head. "And you think I can get you access?" "I think you've been holding Brookstone together longer than Brent's been breathing. If you vouch for me, they'll let it slide." After a long pause, she nodded. "I'll make the call." As Elijah turned to leave, she added, "You're not just doing this for your daughter." He stopped. "No. You're doing it for every kid who's ever been blamed because of where they came from." He didn't respond. Didn't need to. That evening, he gathered his tools, packed only what was necessary: the backup monitor, his rigging kit, the surveillance tablet, and the USB stick Mira had decorated with a dinosaur sticker last year. At dinner, Mira looked at the table setup and asked, "Are you going to war?" He paused, fork midair. "No." "Then why does it feel like it?" He placed the fork down. "Because sometimes the only way to stop a lie from spreading is to pull the curtain back when everyone's watching." "And then what?" "Then we let them see who told it." The next morning, Helen's name cleared the way. Elijah was granted early building access under the title Technical Consultant. The Civic Hall was colder than expected. The staging crew was already installing banners and screens, but no one paid him much attention as he made his way behind the podium. He scanned the panel controls, counted the ports, checked resolution output. Then, quietly, methodically, he connected his tablet, set the trigger key to F7, and tested the 90-second video in silent playback mode. Crystal clear, exactly what he needed. No edits, no excuses. The trap was set. By noon, the Civic Hall buzzed with final preparations. Volunteers arranged chairs into precise rows, every seat fitted with a pamphlet bearing Brent Halden's image beside the bold slogan, "Safe streets begin with us." Elijah remained invisible. He wore the same Navy maintenance polo he used at the school, blending into the scaffolding and wiring. No one questioned him as he moved. Among extension cords and HDMI cables, he preferred it that way. Let them think he was just setting lights and sound, because what mattered wasn't how he entered the room, but how he'd leave it. Every step he took was calculated. He confirmed the backup system was disabled, the projector output routed only through the cable he installed. One push of F7, and the real story would play, unedited, undeniable. He tucked the tablet behind the podium base and wrapped the cable in black tape. Invisible unless you were looking, and no one would be. On his way out, a staffer brushed past him, distracted. "Hey, could you grab the hand sanitizer refills for the check-in tables?" Elijah nodded once, silently, and turned toward the exit. Outside, he found Helen waiting in her car, engine idling, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. She didn't wave, just unlocked the passenger door. "Everything in place?" she asked as he slid in. He nodded. "It's ready." She didn't respond. Immediately. Instead, she reached into her glove box and retrieved a small tin. Inside were half a dozen pins, worn and slightly oxidized. He recognized them instantly. Unit insignia from a medical logistics battalion. Her late husband's. "You're not the first war hero Brookstone tried to erase," she said, voice low. "You're just the first who stayed long enough to answer back." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Later that evening, Mira sat cross-legged on the living room floor, coloring in silence. She hadn't spoken much all day, but he knew she was watching, tracking every movement, listening for changes in tone. When he crouched to hand her a glass of water, she looked up and whispered, Will they say sorry? Elijah paused. Maybe not with words. Then how will I know they believe me? He considered the question. You'll know because no one will look at you like they did before. They won't avoid you. They'll respect you, even if they can't say it out loud. She nodded slowly, still coloring. Before bedtime, she left a small object on the kitchen table. A friendship bracelet woven with paracord, green and black, the same one she'd worn to the fundraiser. You forgot to take this, she said softly. He looked at it, then her. You want me to wear it? It helped me feel strong, before they looked at me like I didn't belong. He took it, wore it. At 6:42 p.m., Brent arrived at the Civic Hall, surrounded by campaign staff and local reporters. He wore a crisp blue blazer, open-collared white shirt, and that same practiced smile, equal parts charm and command. Elijah watched from the back of the room, positioned near the AV booth, where he had just one line of sight to the podium. He didn't need to be close. He just needed to be ready. The seats filled quickly. Residents, board members, local journalists, even a state representative from the district office. Brent opened with a joke, one that landed well enough to prompt polite laughter. Elijah studied the room, familiar faces, the same neighbors who had turned their backs. They didn't know what was coming. Brent's speech shifted to community vigilance, then to youth accountability, and finally to the phrase Elijah had been waiting for. We can't ignore small things, because those small acts become habits, and those habits become danger. And when we pretend not to see them, we enable them. Elijah stepped forward. Not fast, not loud, but enough to draw eyes as he crossed the floor from the AV booth toward the stage aisle. At the front, Brent continued unfazed. And that's why, as your councilman, I believe in setting the right example, especially for our children. Elijah reached the podium. He didn't touch the microphone, just bent slightly and pressed F7. The screen behind Brent flickered, then changed. Gasps spread like a wave as the video began. Silent, uncut, crystal, clear. It played out in front of the entire room. Maxwell Halden pocketing the smartwatch. Brent approaching him. A whisper, a scan of the crowd. Then the moment his eyes landed on Mira, the accusation, the lie. Brent turned mid-sentence, suddenly aware of the footage behind him. His voice caught. Elijah, he said quickly, what is this? This was taken without... But the room wasn't listening to him anymore. They were watching Mira's face freeze in confusion, watching the truth unspool in real time. A beat later, the video ended. No fanfare, no sound, just silence. Then murmurs, then movement, a camera flash, a campaign staffer backing away from the stage. Brent's voice rose again, strained and defensive. This is being taken out of context. I was trying to mediate a situation. Helen Vortman stood up. I was there, she said flatly. And no, you weren't. A pause, then another voice. That's his daughter. And another. That kid didn't do anything. The tide had turned, and for the first time in days, Elijah stood tall, not as a janitor, not as a father fighting whispers, but as a man who refused to let silence write the end of their story. For a moment, Brent didn't move. He stood at the podium, jaw set, hands gripping the sides like he could anchor himself to power if he just held on tightly enough. But power was already walking out the door. A woman near the front, one of the wealthier HOA board members, stood and quietly retrieved her coat. A man in a tailored charcoal blazer followed. Two local reporters, barely hiding their smirks, angled toward the stage for a clearer shot of Brent's face. Helen Vortman remained standing in the middle aisle, her voice calm but ringing with clarity. You had a chance to tell the truth. Instead, you used a little girl to protect your image. The words settled like smoke. Nobody clapped. Nobody needed to. Brent tried to retake control. Let's not confuse a single incident with the greater mission of this campaign. We've all made judgment calls. Elijah stepped forward again, stopping just beside the podium. No one asked you to be perfect, he said, voice low but steady. Just honest. Brent turned toward him, the edge of his voice rising. You don't know the kind of pressure I'm under. You think cleaning schools gives you the right to question the way things work? Elijah didn't flinch. No. But knowing what pressure feels like, that I know better than most. A flash of something crossed Brent's face. Doubt. Maybe even fear. Because for the first time, the crowd wasn't looking at the politician. They were looking at the janitor. And they were listening. By the way, if you've ever seen a lie unravel in real time, smash that like button and stick around. The way this ends, no one saw it coming. Back row to front, the room shifted its attention. Not toward the man with the microphone, but the man without one. Elijah didn't say another word. He didn't need to. He left Brent behind and walked calmly down the center aisle. Helen joined him halfway, falling into step beside him. You timed it well. I was never good at speeches, he said. You didn't need one. Outside, the cool evening air wrapped around them. Mira was waiting by the fountain, her legs swinging from the bench, backpack in her lap. She stood as soon as she saw them, worry etched in every line of her face. Did it work? She asked. Elijah nodded. A breath escaped her chest. Are we going to get in trouble? She asked after a pause. No, Helen answered before Elijah could. But someone else might. Behind them, voices grew louder. Reporters began pressing Brent for follow-ups. The civic hall's polished calm had fractured into confusion, accusations, and headlines in the making. They didn't stay to watch. They walked home together in the quiet. When they reached the house, Mira pulled the bracelet off her wrist and placed it back into Elijah's palm. You can keep it for a while, she said. I don't think I need it now. That night, Elijah sat in the garage, lights off, staring at the paracord woven tight in black and green. He set it gently beside the surveillance tablet, then opened his phone for the first time since the event. The school's principal had emailed. Elijah, I think we need to talk. Come by tomorrow if you're available. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it wasn't a threat either, and that mattered. The next morning, Brent Halden's name trended in local headlines. Councilman under fire for falsely accusing child at public event. Video clips from the civic hall circulated through neighborhood chats and parent groups. The footage was too damning to deny. Brent released a statement by noon. In hindsight, I should have handled the situation with more care. I regret the harm caused to the Kale family. At no point was there malicious intent. Elijah didn't respond, but the apology wasn't really for him. It was for the cameras. Later that day, Mira returned from school with color in her cheeks. Kids still stared, but something had shifted. One teacher pulled her aside and said, "You handled everything with a lot of grace." Another left a small note in her cubby. "We're glad you're here." They weren't big things, but they added up. By evening, a knock came at their door. It was Helen holding a manila envelope. "They've scheduled a vote," she said. HOA board wants to determine Brent's future on the committee. Given everything, I don't think he's going to survive it. Elijah took the envelope. Inside were copies of neighborhood signatures, residents asking for an ethics review. Some names surprised him, others didn't. "You started something," she said. "People are seeing the cracks." He looked out at the neighborhood beyond, the porch, neatly trimmed hedges, perfect sidewalks, silent driveways, and under it all, people learning that silence doesn't mean peace. "You think it'll change anything?" he asked. Helen shrugged. "Maybe not everything, but enough." He glanced down at the envelope again. A slip of Mira's green paracord dangled from his wrist, a small reminder woven from patience, fear, and strength. Enough. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday night, held in the same community clubhouse where Brent once held court with charm and wine. But tonight, the chairs weren't arranged for flattery. They were lined in tight rows, facing a folding table with a single microphone. Elijah didn't sit near the front. He stood in the back with Mira beside him, her hand wrapped around two of his fingers. She hadn't said much on the walk over, but he'd seen the way she tucked her chin up when neighbors passed them on the sidewalk. She didn't lower her eyes anymore. Brent arrived, late. Not by much, but enough to signal that his grip was slipping. He wore the same navy blazer, but without the polish. The crowd, once an audience, now felt like a jury. As he approached the table, Stanton Creel, HOA treasurer and normally Brent's closest ally, didn't look up to greet him. A small thing, but telling. The meeting began with procedural nonsense. Minutes approved, budget reviewed. Elijah stayed still, patient, until the board president cleared her throat. Item 6 on tonight's agenda, a formal motion brought forth by multiple residents regarding Councilman Halden's conduct at a recent Civic Hall event. Specifically, allegations of false public accusation, reputational harm, and ethical misconduct. The room quieted. Brent leaned toward the mic. "Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone this board is not a court of law. The video shown was recorded without authorization." "Actually," Stanton interrupted, "we reviewed the HOA charter. The Civic Hall is a public space during sanctioned events. Recording isn't prohibited." Brent blinked. Elijah noticed the first bead of sweat beneath his collar. Helen Vortman raised her hand from the front row. "May I?" The board nodded. She stood slowly, pulling a folded paper from her bag. 34 signatures. That's more than the threshold required to trigger a vote for temporary removal pending investigation. Brent tried to cut in. "I've given this community years of leadership. And now," Helen said, not facing him, "we give it back to itself." A few people clapped, not loudly, but with purpose. Elijah remained silent, because this wasn't the moment that mattered. The real shift had already happened, in the hallway outside the Civic Hall, in a 10-year-old girl's classroom, in the careful way neighbors began saying good morning again. Still, Mira leaned up toward him. "Is this what justice is?" He bent closer. "It's one part of it." The vote was called. 5 in favor of suspension. 2 abstained. Brent sat back, face tight, lips pressed into a line so thin it looked drawn with a blade. He said nothing as the gavel tapped once. It was done. Afterward, on the clubhouse steps, Helen pulled Elijah aside. "There's more," she said, voice low. "Some parents on the school board want to meet with you, quietly. They saw how you handled everything. They're rethinking a few things." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like who they trust to keep their kids safe." He said nothing. just nodded once. Mira tugged his sleeve. "Can we go home now?" He smiled. "Yeah, baby, we're done here." But as they turned toward the sidewalk, Stanton Creel caught up with them. His usual confidence was replaced with something quieter, unsure. "Elijah," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Look, I didn't say anything earlier because, well, I froze. I knew it was wrong. I just didn't know how far Brent was going to go." "You knew he lied?" Elijah asked, not accusatory, just steady. Stanton nodded. "I saw Max pocket the watch, and I saw Brent look right at him. But by the time he started pointing fingers, I didn't speak up." Elijah studied him. "Why tell me now?" "Because this place runs on reputation, and I figured it was easier to stay quiet than make enemies." "And now?" Stanton exhaled. "Now I realize silence is how people like Brent keep power." Elijah offered his hand. "Then say something next time." Stanton took it. Behind them, neighbors still lingered outside the clubhouse, some talking in low tones, others pretending the night hadn't changed anything. But it had. It would ripple slow. That's how real change worked. Not all at once. Step by step. Back at home, Mira climbed onto the couch, legs tucked beneath her. "Does this mean we're staying for real this time?" Elijah looked around the small living room. Modest, worn, but theirs. "No packed bags," he said. "No backup plans." She smiled, teeth missing on one side. "Even if people still look at us weird?" He sat beside her. "Let them look. Now they know who we are." She leaned her head against his arm. "I think they're starting to like us." "Maybe, but more important, they respect us." The television buzzed softly in the background, but neither of them paid attention. Outside, porch lights glowed across the neighborhood like quiet signals blinking in the dark. A community slowly learning to see what it tried to ignore. The next morning, Elijah returned to the school early, arriving before the lights flicked on in the main hallway. The building smelled of floor polish and cold air, a scent he'd come to associate with clarity, before the noise, before the stares, before the whispers. He unlocked the supply closet and began his rounds, replacing filters in the HVAC vents, checking fire exit locks, inspecting the boiler pressure gauge. These weren't glamorous tasks, but they were his. And unlike the people in power who had failed his daughter, the systems he maintained didn't lie. If something broke, it told the truth. By 7:30, he was nearly done when the principal's door opened behind him. "Elijah," she said, cautious. He straightened, met her gaze. "Got a moment?" He followed her into the office. The blinds were still drawn, sunlight barely filtering through the edges. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, but didn't sit immediately. "I owe you an apology," she said, folding her arms. "I should have stepped in. When the rumors started about your daughter, about you, I should have done more." He didn't respond. Let her fill the silence. She exhaled. "Some of the board members have seen the Civic Hall footage. The pressure's mounting to address what happened. I want to be ahead of it. We're scheduling an open forum next week. A chance for staff and parents to ask questions, and for you, if you want, to speak." "I'm a janitor," Elijah said flatly. "Not that night you weren't." She finally sat. "We want to offer you a formal commendation during the meeting, quietly. No headlines, just acknowledgement." He considered that, then shook his head. "If it's quiet, they'll forget it." She blinked. "So what do you want?" "I want my daughter to walk into this school and never have her bag searched again." The principal nodded slowly. Understood. He stood to leave, but paused at the door. Invite the school board, he said, and the superintendent. Don't make this just about a janitor. Make it about who gets to be heard. That night, Mira waited for him at the table with 2 bowls of instant ramen and a question in her eyes. Are they still mad at us? They're not sure what they are, he replied, but they're listening now. She nodded and returned to slurping noodles. Later, as she brushed her teeth, Elijah pulled out the small, fireproof lockbox he kept above the pantry. Inside were a few things he never thought he'd show anyone in Brookstone Ridge. His commendation, a folded letter from his CO, and a small patch bearing the emblem of the 217th Tactical Recon Group, his old unit. He slipped the patch into his pocket and turned toward the garage. Because it was time to start preparing the next step. By the way, if you've ever watched someone go from forgotten to undeniable, this is the part where it starts getting real. Subscribe with the bell on. The confrontation coming? Let's just say it finally hits home. That weekend, Elijah requested access to the school's old AV equipment room. It hadn't been used in years, not since the district upgraded to newer tech, but the cabinet still held a mobile projector cart and 2 working mics. He signed them out under his employee ID and brought them home. Mira raised an eyebrow. You setting up a movie night? Something like that, he said. He laid the equipment out on the garage workbench and began testing cables, checking latency, calibrating the audio. This wouldn't be just a talk, it would be a reveal. He reached into a side drawer and pulled out something he hadn't touched since deployment. A black dry bag with a backup SSD drive. Inside were fragments, footage from his last mission, scans of briefings, encrypted communications. All things he'd never intended to revisit, but people believed patterns, they believed images, and most of all, they believed what they saw with their own eyes. Mira stepped into the garage later that night, holding a flashlight. You're making another video? He nodded. She approached slowly. Are you going to tell them everything? No, he said. Just enough. Enough for what? So they know the person they ignored could have saved them if things had gone worse. She looked at the files, then at him. I like it when you don't stay quiet, he smiled. Me too. The day of the forum arrived faster than expected. Elijah wore his maintenance uniform. Not a suit, not a badge, just the same outfit they'd seen him in all year. Because what mattered wasn't what he wore, it was what he stood for. The gymnasium was half full when he arrived. Parents, teachers, board members. Helen sat near the back, arms crossed, watching everything. Mira sat in the front row. Elijah approached the podium when called, slid the USB into the laptop, and adjusted the mic. He didn't begin with an apology. He began with a map, a satellite photo, then a troop roster, then a time-stamped footage clip of a village evacuation that mirrored discipline, chaos, and control. And only after that did he say, "My name is Elijah Kale. Before I became the janitor at this school, I ran evac logistics for U.S. recon teams in active zones. I've seen what real danger looks like, and I've seen what silence does when no one speaks up." The room leaned in, finally. "My name is Elijah Kale," he repeated, the map still glowing faintly behind him. "And I know how to keep people safe, because I've had to do it when failure meant people didn't come home." No one moved, no one coughed, no one looked away. He let the silence stretch, long enough for discomfort to settle in the lungs of every parent and teacher who had once whispered behind closed doors. He wanted them to sit with it. The quiet had never frightened him. What frightened him was what people filled silence with when they didn't know the truth. I took this job because I wanted peace, he continued. Not applause, not credit, just peace. For my kids, for my daughter. He didn't name Mira. He didn't have to. She was right there in the front row, head high, eyes steady. But peace isn't built on silence. It's built on trust. And the moment my daughter was accused, not questioned, not misunderstood, but accused, without evidence, that trust was broken. A few teachers shifted in their chairs. One of them, Ms. Harden, who taught 6th grade English, lowered her eyes. "I'm not here tonight to humiliate anyone," he said. "I'm here to show you what it looks like when a community decides to look away, and what it takes to make them look again." He pressed the next slide. It was the Civic Hall footage. Again. Only this time, it was framed side by side with a silent clip from a forward ops command tent. He didn't explain it, just let it play. The resemblance was uncanny. 2 boys caught lying under pressure, 2 authority figures making a choice about whom to blame. One war zone, one fundraiser, same strategy, same cowardice. When it ended, he stepped back from the mic. "I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm asking you to remember this the next time you see a quiet man cleaning your halls and think he has nothing to say." Applause didn't erupt, but someone stood, then another, and another. No cheering, just a rising silence of a different kind, one that no longer dismissed him. Behind the AV table, the superintendent turned to whisper something to the principal. Elijah didn't care what it was, because it was done. By the way, if you've made it this far, subscribe with the bell on. Because what happens after this moment isn't just redemption, it's change. And it's coming for everyone who thought silence could bury truth. After the forum, people began approaching him, not out of guilt, but something closer to respect. A math teacher asked him to speak at Career Week. The librarian asked if he'd consider mentoring a student interested in security systems. Even the school resource officer offered a quiet nod as he passed by. But the most surprising moment came 3 days later when Stanton Creel showed up at the maintenance office, holding a clipboard. "We've got a request," Stanton said. "Civic Oversight Committee wants to expand its school safety program. They want you on it, not as a technician, as a consultant." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You recommending me?" Stanton shifted. "I'm not the only one. Helen's pushing it. So are a few board members. Said they'd rather have someone who's already proven they'll speak up." Elijah didn't answer right away. Instead, he took the clipboard, flipped through the proposal, and said, "I'll think about it." Stanton nodded and left. That night, he and Mira sat on the porch. The swing creaked slightly under their weight. "Why don't you want to say yes?" she asked. "I'm not sure I want to be in charge," he said. "Sometimes it's enough to fix things quietly." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "But if the quiet people don't say something, who will?" He looked at her and smiled. A week later, Brent Halden officially withdrew his campaign for re-election. His statement was brief. "The public deserves leadership that restores trust. I've become a distraction to that mission." No one responded, not in protest, not in defense. He was simply done. Later that month, the school held its annual talent showcase. Mira didn't perform, but she stood near the stage helping direct students, calling cues and whispering encouragement. At the end of the night, she spotted Elijah standing in the back and ran to him. They asked me to help again next year, she said, breathlessly. He ruffled her hair. You gonna charge them a director's fee? She grinned. I already asked for snacks. He laughed, and the sound came easier now, less guarded, less reserved. As they left, Mira slipped her hand into his. You're not just my dad, she said. You're kind of like my shield. He squeezed her fingers. And you're the reason I raised it. For the first time in months, Brookstone Ridge felt like home. Not because it changed, but because they had changed how it saw them. The following week began with a surprise, this time a quiet one. At the Monday morning staff meeting, Elijah was asked to stand. He hesitated. His uniform was smudged from boiler repairs. His hands still smelled faintly of rust and lemon degreaser. He wasn't dressed for ceremonies. He never was. But when the principal cleared her throat and said, Mr. Kale has kept more than just our pipes running this year, everyone turned. There was no plaque, no spotlight, just a few lines of acknowledgement about vigilance, integrity, and what it meant to protect a school from the inside out. Then a nod, and a thank you. He didn't speak, just gave a small nod back and returned to his seat at the edge of the room. But that simple moment shifted something. People who once looked through him now looked to him. In small ways, trust was returning. By lunch, teachers who had avoided eye contact were waving. A custodian he'd never spoken to offered half of her sandwich. Someone in the district office sent over a refurbished mobile toolkit, labeled quietly under special project inventory. He didn't ask where it came from, but he knew. Later that day, he stopped by Mira's classroom to drop off her hoodie. She was at her desk, mid-art project, and didn't look up until she saw the color. You brought it, she whispered, cheeks pink with surprise. You left it on the swing again, she grinned. They asked me to be line leader this week. He knelt beside her desk. You gonna be fair to the people in the back? Only if they stop talking during transitions. He gave her a wink and walked out, passing by Miss Harden in the hallway. She didn't flinch this time. Elijah, she said, stopping him. I wanted to say, I didn't handle things well. When it happened, he waited. I watched it unfold and didn't say anything, and that's not who I want to be. He nodded once. Then be someone else, now, she swallowed. Would you consider speaking in my class? We're starting a unit on decision-making and ethics. I think the kids need to hear from someone who's been through it. He didn't answer immediately, but he didn't say no. That evening, Helen stopped by unannounced, holding a folded newspaper and a single manila folder. You're making headlines again, she said as he opened the door. Front page of the Brookstone Register. They ran a feature on neighborhood integrity. You're in paragraph 4. Hope it's a good paragraph. Depends how you feel about the phrase, quiet moral compass. He smirked. Bit poetic. She handed him the folder. This one matters more. Inside was a typed letter from the Civic Council Advisory Board. They were forming a new community liaison subcommittee, one meant to include voices previously overlooked. At the bottom was his name. They weren't asking him to serve. They were offering him the ET, first seat. He looked at Helen. This your doing? No, she said. Yours. I just stopped the wrong people from getting in the way. He read the letter again. I haven't said yes. You will. Mira appeared behind him, toothbrush in hand. Can Helen stay for tea? Helen smiled. Only if your dad agrees to show me where he hides the good honey. Later, after Helen left, Elijah sat alone in the garage. The lights were off, but the dusk filtering through the side window gave everything a soft orange glow. He looked at the tablet resting on his workbench, the same one that had played the video, launched the reckoning, changed everything. He'd kept it out, maybe out of habit, or maybe to remind himself that silence is a choice. But tonight he powered it down and placed it gently in the drawer. Because sometimes the fight is loud, and sometimes it's finished. Elijah closed the drawer with a soft click. For the first time in months, the garage didn't feel like a bunker. It felt like a place to breathe. No more plans taped to the wall, no backup footage, no gear waiting to be deployed, just tools and silence that no longer held weight. Upstairs, Mira was humming while brushing her hair, the melody drifting down the hall like it belonged. It did. She'd begun leaving her door open again at night. That had happened gradually, without words, a signal of trust restored. He stepped into the kitchen to fix her lunch for the morning. Peanut butter, strawberries, and a small note he tucked into the side pocket of her bag. A habit that had started when she first began dreading school after the accusation. He didn't know if she still read them, but he still wrote them. The front doorbell rang just after 8 p.m. Not a knock, a ring. Polite, expected. He opened it to find Stanton Creel on the porch, holding 2 folders and wearing an expression that said he didn't come on HOA business. "You got a minute?" Elijah nodded and stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table. Mira peeked once, then quietly disappeared down the hall. She knew how to read the room. "I won't take long," Stanton said. "There's something going on behind the scenes. Thought you should know." Elijah leaned back. "Go on." "The Civic Council is facing pressure from Brent's old network. Not officially, but you made people uncomfortable. They want to water down the subcommittee, add more neutral voices, which really means people who won't challenge anyone." Elijah exhaled through his nose. "Not surprised." "I don't think they'll push you out," Stanton added, "but I think they're hoping you'll walk away." Elijah met his eyes. "That's not happening." "I figured. That's why I brought this." He slid the first folder across the table. "It's a proposal, formal restructure of the HOA grievance process. Clear timelines, transparency rules, oversight." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You wrote this?" "Started it. Needs your eye. We get this through. It won't just fix Brookstone Ridge. Other HOAs might copy it." He tapped the second folder. "And this one is from Helen. She wants you to present it, not me." Elijah flipped the folder open. Inside was a draft resolution titled "The Kale Provision." He blinked. "What?" "She didn't name it. I did," Stanton said. "You took a hit, stood up, and changed the story. People should remember how." Elijah sat with it. Not just the document, but what it meant. All this time, he'd focused on protecting Mira, clearing her name, exposing a lie. Now he was being handed the pen to write new rules, ones that could prevent the next lie before it started. "You really think they'll let it pass?" he asked. "Some won't, some will stall, but if you're the one standing at the mic, it'll be harder for them to pretend it doesn't matter." Elijah nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's build it." Stanton smiled. "I'll schedule the vote." After he left, Elijah returned to the garage and retrieved the old dry bag one last time. Not for the footage, for the patch, the emblem from his unit. He pressed it into the new folder's cover, not as a decoration, but as a reminder. that survival was never the same as healing, and that leadership sometimes looked like a man in work boots and a school badge, quietly building a system that didn't need heroes next time. By the way, if you've ever wished someone would change the rules instead of just surviving them, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens in the next part, it's more than redemption, it's reform, and it's personal. The next few days moved fast. Helen helped circulate early drafts. Parents added their signatures. Teachers, once silent, now raised questions about prior policies. Even a few former skeptics joined in, not out of guilt, but because they saw which direction the wind had shifted. Mira watched it all with curiosity. "You're like the boss of the neighborhood now," she said one morning while tying her shoes. "I'm just fixing broken things," Elijah replied. "Same thing," he smiled. The morning of the proposal vote, Mira left a note for him in his lunchbox. He found it mid-afternoon, scribbled in orange crayon on a folded napkin. "Don't let them talk over you. Use your dad voice." That evening, when Elijah stood before the HOA board and the full assembly of Brookstone Ridge, he wasn't nervous. He was ready. Because this time, he wasn't speaking for himself. He was speaking for what came next. The room was full, but it wasn't tense. Not like the civic hall. Not like the board meetings that had come before it. This time, there was no hidden footage waiting to play. No shocking reversal. No trap to spring. Just rows of neighbors. Some skeptical, some curious, and many still undecided, facing the man they once ignored. Elijah stood. At the podium, the folder labeled "The Kale Provision" resting open in front of him. He'd reviewed it 3 times before arriving. Not to memorize the language, but to own it. Mira's note was folded in his back pocket. He could feel it there. "Most of you know me," he began. "Some of you pretended not to for a long time. But by now, I think we've crossed that line." Light chuckles rippled through the room. Not loud, but honest. "Good," he continued. "When my daughter was falsely accused, the system didn't fail us because it was broken. It failed us because it wasn't built to handle the truth when it came from the bottom up." He flipped to the first page of the proposal. "This policy isn't about punishing anyone. It's about making sure what happened to us, what could have happened to any of you, doesn't happen again." He walked them through the provisions. Timeline guarantees for grievances, independent mediation, mandatory evidence before punitive action, and, most importantly, public transparency. Not once did he raise his voice. He didn't have to. By the way, if you've ever wanted to see justice reshape a system, not just shout at one, this is the moment you've been waiting for. Like and share if you believe quiet power is still power. When he finished, he closed the folder and stepped back. Silence followed. Not cold, contemplative. People weren't looking at their watches, they were thinking. Then a voice from the second row spoke. Helen. "I move to adopt the Kale Provision as presented," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "I second it," came Stanton's voice. The vote was called. Hands rose, then more and more. When the count was finalized, it wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Passed. Elijah didn't smile right away. His hands stayed at his sides, steady. Only when Mira, seated beside Helen in the front row, shot him a quick thumbs up did his shoulders drop the smallest inch. The board. Chair cleared her throat. "We now recognize Mr. Kale as the inaugural Community Ethics Liaison for Brookstone Ridge, effective immediately." There was no applause, just respectful nods, just how he preferred it. As the room dispersed, people stopped him. Some shook his hand. Others simply nodded as they passed. The same man they once looked past was now a name they'd attached to a reform. He wasn't invisible anymore. Outside, the evening was cool, wind pressing gently through the hedges that bordered the street. Mira skipped ahead on the sidewalk, swinging her backpack in a wide arc. "Did I use the dad voice enough?" he asked when she spun back. "You scared Ms. Harden. That counts." He laughed, and this time it came freely. They stopped by the old swing near the clubhouse, once Mira's refuge, now just a swing again. "Do you think it'll stick?" she asked, kicking off the ground. "The rule," she nodded. "It will," he said, "because it's written, now, and because people are watching. Even the mean ones? Especially the mean ones." She leaned back, wind in her hair. "Then I'm not scared of them anymore." He looked at her, pride swelling in a way that made his chest ache. "You never had to be," he said. That night, after Mira had gone to bed, Elijah stepped into the garage one more time. He didn't need to fix anything. He wasn't escaping. He just needed a moment alone. He reached into the drawer and took out the patch from his old unit. This time, he didn't put it away. He nailed it to the wall above his workbench. Not as a badge, but as a foundation. Not everything needed to be hidden to stay safe. Some things were meant to be seen, to remind you who you are when the world tries to tell you otherwise. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Helen. "You've got mail," she said, holding up an envelope. "Civic Council wants you to consult on a broader community conduct framework. They're calling it a model for conflict prevention." He took the envelope. "They really should have just called it common sense." She smiled. "Common sense needed a name. Now it has one." He looked down at the sealed envelope, and for once, he didn't hesitate. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter all morning, unopened but not ignored. Elijah made breakfast, packed Mira's lunch, double-knotted her shoes, and walked her halfway to school before she raced ahead to join her friends near the flagpole. She looked over her shoulder once and grinned. She didn't wave. She didn't have to. He stood for a moment, letting the image settle in his mind. His daughter, moving forward in a place that had once tried to push her out. She didn't carry fear anymore, and neither did he. Back at home, he opened the envelope. The letter was formal, but warm, an invitation to co-author a new regional policy framework built on the success of the Kale provision. Not just an advisory role this time. They wanted his voice in the room where decisions were made, not behind the curtain. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "We didn't just see what you did, we learned from it. Let's build something that lasts." He read it twice, then folded it. This time, the silence around him didn't feel like absence. It felt earned. Outside, Brookstone Ridge moved as it always had, mowers humming, sprinklers hissing, delivery vans rolling past sun-warmed driveways. But the people inside those homes? They had changed. The board meetings weren't performative anymore. Parents asked harder questions at school. Even Stanton Creel had taken to walking the sidewalks with a clipboard, checking in with residents not out of obligation, but accountability. And Brent Halden? Gone. Word had spread he'd moved to a quieter suburb 2 counties over. No campaign banners, no farewell speeches, just silence. The same silence he'd once weaponized, now turned inward. That evening, Elijah and Mira returned to the Civic Hall, not for battle, but for celebration. The HOA had converted it into a community recognition night. Students were being honored for projects, retirees acknowledged for service, and volunteers thanked for contributions. Mira stood in the back, arms crossed. Do we have to stay the whole time? Only until the cookies run out, she smirked. When her name was called for leadership under pressure, she walked to the stage with a straight back and steady pace. No fidgeting, no fear. The applause came loud and sincere. As she returned to her seat, Helen leaned over from the next row and whispered, "She walks just like you." Elijah glanced at his daughter, head high, hands loose at her sides, eyes focused forward. "No," he said, "she walks better." Later, on their walk home, Mira pulled something from her hoodie pocket. It was the paracord bracelet. The same one Brent had tried to use to brand her a thief. "I don't think I need it anymore," she said, handing it to him. He took it carefully, thumb brushing the knot she'd tied herself. "You sure?" "I think it helped me then," she said. "But now, I'm the one helping other people." He looked at her, really looked, and saw someone becoming. Someone who'd seen injustice and stood taller anyway. Someone he'd fought for, and someone who, without knowing it, had saved him too. He slipped the bracelet onto his wrist, not to protect her anymore, but to carry what she'd taught him. At home, they climbed the porch steps together. The night was quiet except for the sound of a flag snapping softly down the street and wind whispering through the sycamore trees. Elijah paused at the door. He turned back to look at the street, the homes, the lights behind the curtains. He wasn't waiting for anything. He was acknowledging it. The battle had never been about reputation. It had been about dignity. And dignity, when protected, didn't just echo, it built. So when Mira asked, "What story comes next, Dad?" he didn't flinch. He smiled and said, "Ours isn't done, but maybe someone else needs a shield now." Your turn. Give me the next title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Airport security mocked the single dad until a general ran toward him and saluted. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?